Hey there, Cheryl here. Today is an extremely special day. I am super excited to be here with Kimberly Bryant, CEO and founder of Black Girls Code. Kimberly, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This is like on the heels of a very important conversation that you had with Dan Roth on LinkedIn. And I really appreciate you taking the time to have this real impactful and important conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. I am, really happy to be in conversation with you after working with you and Black Girls Code as an organization for several years. It's great for us to finally have a chance to have this conversation leader to leader. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much. Yes, a lot sure has transpired since we met in 2016. And just rolling back a little bit, when you started Black Girls Code in 2011 from nothing, I mean, I think from my understanding, your own funds, it was really bootstrapped and have grown it into a, 40 plus $1 million nonprofit with backing from Google and Mackenzie Scott, the Gates Foundation, and also from Nike. And also, besides that, really influencing the lives of almost 20,000 girls in technology, and not just girls in technology, but girls who are probably further marginalized within our gender. I think it's really safe to say you're shifting the future of technology with the work that you've done. So, can you share a little bit about not just what was your why, but also who is your who? Like, you have a rich history even before Black Girls Code. So, what inspired you early in your career to be a woman in technology and then really to take the reins into your own hands and really make the path ahead of you better for those girls coming behind?
Well, I told the story quite a bit, I think, around, part of my why in terms of starting Black Girls Code really, was my daughter and her interest as a middle school student in computer science and technology and gaming and game design, game development, and not finding here in the Bay Area that there were many opportunities for her to be involved and be in community with other girls like her that were interested, that had same demographics and background in it. But I think, if we look a little bit deeper, my interest and my path in terms of doing this work started well before that. It really started, perhaps when I was a 10-year old or 8-year old, 7-year old girl growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, and in an inner city environment with much less opportunities and much less privilege, if you will, than what my daughter was raised in, having a mom that was an engineer in the in a biotech organization. Like I did not have any of those opportunities and access more so than my daughter had. My access to opportunities was the fact that I was a good student, and being a good student and being in an advanced pathway as a student allowed me to be exposed to opportunities to go into the STEM career that I eventually had as an adult. Um, but I often found that in those advanced classrooms and my advanced curricula as a young person, I did not see many other girls that looked like me. And I certainly didn't see or have experience with engineers in my community. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know what an engineer did. My mother was a blue collar worker, growing up and a single parent for most of the time. So I did not have exposure to Black professionals, and certainly no Black professionals that were engineers. And so my pathway to, becoming a woman in this male dominated field, it was a difficult one. It was one where I did not know really what I was getting into when I went to school and majored in engineering. I had very few role models and mentors throughout my 4 years of college. And even when I graduated, I was kind of thrust into this managerial role with very little coaching, very little mentoring, very little support. And I sort of had to figure it out along the way. So many times I think back on those experiences, and I absolutely think it shaped me in terms of being fiercely protective of women, especially women that are thrust into these leadership roles, or and certainly women in male-dominated career paths, whether that be engineering, computer science, or elsewhere. But also really, fiercely protective of other Black women because, I think many times along that path that I had, I could have dropped out of the funnel and not been here sitting in this space because I was often told that I wouldn't be successful, or that I couldn't be successful, or ignored and rendered invisible along this journey. And I really feel strongly driven to be a beacon for other women, especially other Black women, so that they understand that they are valuable, that they are seen, and that they are worthy of exploring their pathways and dreams, even if others have told them no.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such an important point that it starts with feeling worthy. And
Mhm.
talked a little bit offline about the impressionable age, that sometimes we forget about or discount the things that we've heard from people of influential places, whether they're parents or teachers, that have told us when we were what they've told us between age, let's say 6 and 16, and really examining that and making sure that we have a tight group of people that are reshifting our belief system. And just referring real quick to your interview with Dan Roth that was on LinkedIn pretty recently, some of the things that you mentioned, such as, and you were referring a lot of the time specifically to your nonprofit when it comes to having bylaws that are really airtight, and also having members and people in your community that are small and very tight, and make sure to vet and revet, as far as the staff, the volunteer, the consultants, the board members. But it seems like that advice that you mentioned when you were speaking specifically of Black Girls Code and what you've learned through the experience over the last, 11 years, is that it seems like it's universal. So it seems like, to have a tight group, to really vet who you spend your time with. And if you don't have that inner circle, do you think it's important to go out and find the mentors, find the sponsors, choose your friends wisely, and really take some of what you mentioned in that interview when it comes to your experience for the nonprofit, and really build your own personal board of directors on your journey to shift maybe what you think is possible. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree with that. I think, that my experience with Black Girls Code and just with life in general is that it's incredibly important not only to understand what your core values are, and I don't mean core values that are tied into your work per se, but what are your personal core values, and to align yourself in all facets of life with folks that, um, if not share those values, because we all have different personal core values, but that they're not in direct opposition to them, right? Because I think that's when the friction that can't be resolved tends to occur. So I think, like, even going back into my experience with creating the board of directors at Black Girls Code, I talk a bit about in that interview. I think it, is still there. Hopefully, it made the cut about, initially thinking we had to legitimize the organization, and to legitimize this organization that had been doing good work for almost 7 to 8 years by the time we created this formalized board structure. Um, I thought I needed to go and seek out folks that had a certain um, a pedigree, if you will, from a professional standpoint. And I turned away from some of those folks that were aligned in the trenches as community leaders and builders right alongside me for all of those years, and decided I needed something else to legitimize, the organization's next phase of work. And in hindsight, I don't think that I did need those things. I needed some folks that had experienced the same type of struggles that I had as a community based grassroots leader and had some of those same values aligned with building things for the community and not driven by more capitalistic gains or things that were not aligned with the work that I really wanted to do with the organization. And I think with whatever you are doing in life, be that, personal community, in neighborhood community, personal relationships or your work, really being sure that folks that you are in community with are aligned and have complementary values to yours is important for success and for peace of mind and being able to be successful in whatever your mission and journeys and goals are.
Yeah, that's so important. I just want to reiterate what you said about core values. The first step is being aware of what they are, and then, within whichever communities like you were talking about, and also thinking through, because a lot of times, especially for emerging leaders, sometimes friends, even when you're thinking about social circles, I mean, those can be really important too. And maybe it's time to take inventory of, you've heard of the saying, we are a compilation of the five people we spend the most time with. So maybe it's time
Mhm.
to start taking inventory and not kicking anyone to the curb, but thinking of, okay, who needs to get pulled in and who maybe needs to get pushed out. And we don't have that that core group that's aligned with your values, then there's ways to seek out and be really proactive about finding them. So I think understanding your core values and then creating the communities to support them is super important. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and also being vulnerable, because I know that this hasn't really been an easy time. And so, but learning from you is going to really help a lot of people after you. And I'm really excited also to learn more about what's going to come next and what you're going to learn from some of these very important examples. And so, getting to the topic of talent, building an equitable talent pipeline, a lot of these things are very directly created, really, what is the word I'm trying to say, related, because I'm thinking that creating an equitable talent pipeline really has to do with, who are you connected to? Who are you making big asks of? And also not just creating the pipeline, but then supporting them going forward. So, based on your experience in Black Girls Code and even before Black Girls Code, can you offer some insight on how to build and sustain an equitable talent pipeline?
Well, that's a great question. I think when we first started Black Girls Code back in 2011, we thought that the problem we were facing was one of, I want to say, volume, like getting as many girls trained as possible, many girls from marginalized communities trained as possible to really front load this talent tech pipeline. So that kind of goes to this big hairy vision of training 1 million girls to code by 2040 that we had, from the very beginning. I think what has been unfortunate to find over the last 10 years, the number of Black women in the tech industry has actually declined. So when you look at those numbers and those statistics, and you look at it from an ecosystem perspective, where Black Girls Code is certainly not the only organization doing this work, but even we have reached 20,000 girls. Then you have other organizations, Girls Who Code, Girls in Tech, many different organizations doing this work, So there certainly has been a volume fed into this funnel, but the number of Black women in tech industry has declined. So something is not working there. And I think that really comes back to this notion of we can train as many students, as many Black women as we possibly can, and those numbers and the statistics will not change until the organizations in which they are being fed into changes their culture. So they not only come into the door, they come into the organization, they stay, they grow within these organizations, they level up, they become the leaders, the CEOs of these organizations, so that they are not falling out of this leaky pipeline, if you will, is what we have now. So I think part of this issue around sustainability is not just about the K through 12 pipeline or even that next 4 years of college pathways, 2 or 4 years. It's about what needs to change in organizational culture. What type of systemic changes need to come to the forefront of our discussion so that these environments not only nurture people that come from a diverse background and community, they help them grow in those organizations and thrive in those organizations, and that organizations such as ours on the outside can also now kind of shift our focus on not just teaching coding skills, but teaching these holistic skills on how do you survive in this industry until the changes are evident so that where you do feel fulfilled. And so I think more work needs to be done internally from a systemic perspective within the organizations in the industry, as opposed to trying to fix the students themselves by, either giving them more tech skills, etc. So I think it's this value-based lens. It's like it's not the students we're trying to fix. Now we need to actually fix these systems because that's what's broken.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that really resonates a lot because in the last like 3 months and doing speaking events at Oracle and Insight, Women in Technology Global, and what have you, it's just what I'm learning is that, there's D&I experts that are dedicating their entire careers to making this right. Um, but a lot of times it's not happening quick enough of no fault of theirs. But it seems like it's needs to be from the top down and their leadership, even above, the chief D&I expert has to have that leadership buy-in. But I'm also seeing that what's helpful is on, and of course I'm partial to coaching because that's what the
Mhm.
hat that I wear, but also providing the shoulder to shoulder help and really going with them and shifting mindsets and having that support system. And like I said, going shoulder to shoulder with them, and making sure that they are supported. So coming at exactly what you were saying is to really shift cultures and companies, but coming at it from both angles to give some of these girls, emerging leaders, the tools and the mindset to to keep going, to support each other, and like we were talking about early, how to make big asks, and how to increase their visibility and impact, and how do they feel so they feel worthy in a place where they might be the only or a double only or what have you. So giving them that holistic support, and also while these shifts and changes are happening in the background. So that really resonates well. When you were talking about, it's the organizations that need to change, and maybe part of that change can come with ongoing support for the women that they're bringing into their pipeline.
Yeah. And I think we're just in this period also of rapid cultural transformational change. And I mean that from the standpoint that, I am a Gen Xer. I am still in the workforce, very much so in the workforce, but I have this length of experience of being in my field, which gives me certain perspectives on how I see work life and what work life looks like. But we're also in this period where we have, this very large millennial cohort, generational shift in terms of what they view as work life and what a successful work life looks for them. But also now, my daughter's a Gen Z. She's about to enter the workforce. She graduates in a couple of weeks, and their perspective is totally different. And I certainly don't mean to overlook the baby boomers because the baby boomers are still in the workforce too. So I think we're at a very interesting time where there's this interesting mix of generational perspectives interwoven into various workplaces. And then you layer on top of that the demographic differences and perspectives and the gender differences and perspectives and all these other marginalized identities on top of that. And I think it's a very sometimes challenging time to be a leader. And I'll speak for myself, it certainly was. A challenging time to be a leader because you have to not only deal with your own stuff. You have to understand everybody else's stuff and what they bring into the workplace each and every day. And it's very different in many ways in terms of how we've been taught. And so I think it will be interesting as we have these future of work conversations to understand, like, how do we change not just work hours or work days? Is it a 4 day work week, a 5 day? Like, I think that's a mute point. It's about how do we change culture and how we interact with each other, whether that's a 3 day, a 5 day week, or virtual, in person. But how do we change those ways of communicating with each other, those ways of sharing power in a way that everybody feels heard, everybody feels in some ways equity in the workplace, which is something that is very different than, I would say, the past decades of work. And if we don't get that piece right, I think we'll certainly have many more instances of, the great resignation. I don't, that may not be going away until we learn how to change that work culture in a way that creates equity overall.
Yeah, and I just have a hunch that you're going to be part of the solution somehow, based on what I know about you. And so, for everybody listening, can you give a call to action? Something that either go here, look at this, read that, or always remember this particular thing. What would you like to leave with the listeners?
I would absolutely, I would definitely encourage folks to dig a bit deeper into these notions of culture and power dynamics in the workplace. There's lots of reading on that. I've spoken about that a lot in my work. And I also want to really encourage folks to, as I move forward into what's the next phase for me, to continue to follow me and the work that I hope to do in this, specifically around women and women, the impact of leadership with women leaders, and especially women from marginalized communities. And I would also say just really continue on this pathway of growing internally ourselves with how we show up in the world as leaders, and understanding that the world is changing at a very pa- a very rapid pace. And if we don't evolve as leaders in a way to keep up with that rapid change of growth, we won't be very effective.
100%. So if you are not following Kimberly Bryant here on LinkedIn, please do so. And what I know you're pretty active on Twitter. What is your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle and most of my social media handles, with the exception of LinkedIn, whereas Kimberly Bryant is six, the number six, and Gems, Gems, and really excited about some of the things I'm cooking up for the future. So follow me in any of those places.
All right. Well, if you are not following Kimberly Bryant on all of those platforms, I would recommend you do so. Kimberly Bryant, it's been an absolute honor. I can't wait to see what's next for you. I am cheering you on 100%. One of your biggest fans. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.